The story of the Dutch colonization of Indonesia begins in the late 16th century, during an era of fierce competition among European powers for control of the spice trade. Indonesia, then known as the Spice Islands for its rich production of nutmeg, cloves, and pepper, was the golden prize for merchants across the globe. Spices were more than just flavor enhancers. They were rare, expensive, and used in medicine and food preservation, making them highly valuable in Europe. Enter the Dutch, a seafaring nation eager to expand its influence and fortunes. In their pursuit of wealth, they set sail for Southeast Asia, determined to secure exclusive access to Indonesia's spice trade. This journey would mark the beginning of a centuries-long colonial domination. The Dutch made their first significant contact with Indonesia in 1595, aiming to bypass Portuguese and Arab intermediaries who had controlled the spice trade for decades. By 1602, the Dutch formed the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, a groundbreaking institution and the world's first multinational corporation. The VOC was no ordinary trading company. It was granted governmental powers by the Dutch Republic, including the ability to wage war, sign treaties, and establish colonies. The VOC soon became the most powerful colonial organization in the region, backed by military might and vast fleets. At first, the Dutch approached the local rulers of Indonesian kingdoms as trade partners. However, realizing the profit potential of direct control, they shifted to conquest. The VOC often exploited internal divisions within Indonesian kingdoms, playing rival rulers against one another. A notorious example occurred in the Banda Islands, the source of the world's nutmeg. In 1621, under VOC leader Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, the Dutch massacred or enslaved the local population, securing a monopoly over nutmeg production. This brutal takeover exemplified the Dutch commitment to domination at any cost. In 1619, the Dutch captured the vital port city of Jayakarta, renaming it Batavia, modern-day Jakarta. Batavia served as the VOC's central hub for administration and trade operations in Southeast Asia. From Batavia, the Dutch enforced strict control over trade routes and spice production. Other European powers, such as the Portuguese and British, were gradually pushed out, while Indonesian producers were forced to meet stringent quotas under Dutch supervision. As the Dutch tightened their grip, life for the local Indonesian population became increasingly difficult. Farmers were coerced into growing specific crops, such as coffee, sugar, and spices, instead of food for their own consumption. Heavy taxes were levied, and forced labor systems were implemented, creating widespread poverty and food shortages. The cultivation system, introduced in the 19th century, was particularly exploitative. Under this system, villages were required to surrender a portion of their land to grow export crops exclusively for the Dutch. These crops were sold on global markets, with the profits funding Dutch prosperity while Indonesians toiled in misery. By the late 18th century, the VOC began to decline. Corruption among its officials, poor management, and growing competition from other European powers weakened the company. By 1799, the VOC was dissolved, and the Dutch government took direct control over its territories in Indonesia. This marked the beginning of a new chapter. Indonesia became a formal colony of the Netherlands. While the Dutch government introduced administration reforms, their primary goal remained exploiting Indonesia's resources for economic gain. Throughout Dutch rule, Indonesians resisted in various ways. Some resistance came from local kingdoms unwilling to submit to colonial rule, while peasant uprisings also erupted in response to exploitation. One notable rebellion was the Java War, 1825-1830, led by Prince Diponegoro. The war, fought against heavy odds, became a symbol of Indonesian defiance. Although it ended in failure for the Javanese forces, the uprising demonstrated the resilience and determination of the Indonesian people. Dutch colonization left a profound impact on Indonesian society. As the Dutch sought to impose their culture and governance, local traditions and systems were disrupted. Indonesian elites were often co-opted into colonial administrative roles, creating a divide between the ruling class and the general population. However, the cultural exchange was not one-sided. While Indonesians adopted some European customs, Elements of Indonesian culture also influenced Dutch life. For instance, Indonesian cuisine and art became popular among Dutch settlers. By the early 20th century, a growing Indonesian nationalist movement began challenging Dutch authority. Educated Indonesians, many of whom had studied in the Netherlands or at Western-style schools in Indonesia, became aware of global ideas about independence and equality. Organizations such as the Sarekat Islam and the Indonesian National Party, PNI, led by future independence leader Sukarno, gained significant support. These groups demanded self-rule and an end to colonial exploitation. The Dutch attempted to suppress these movements, but the tide of history was turning. The 20th century would eventually see Indonesia earn its independence after a long and arduous struggle. The Dutch colonization of Indonesia lasted for over 3 centuries, leaving deep scars and an enduring legacy. On the one hand, Dutch economic policies enriched the Netherlands, propelling it to European prominence. On the other, these same policies impoverished and oppressed millions of Indonesians. Today, the impacts of colonialism can still be felt in Indonesia's political systems, economy, and culture. The centuries of Dutch control were a period of exploitation and struggle, but they also forged a complex and diverse nation that would eventually rise to reclaim its freedom. The Dutch colonization of Indonesia is a striking example of how the pursuit of wealth and power shaped global history. It serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of imperialism, where economic gain often came at the cost of human suffering. However, history also teaches us about resilience and determination. Despite centuries of oppression, the Indonesian people maintained their identity and culture, eventually achieving independence. By understanding this history, we gain insight into the enduring impacts of colonialism and the importance of striving for justice and equality. The story of the Dutch colonization of Indonesia is one of ambition, exploitation, and resistance. It highlights the complex interplay of power, resources, and human resilience. As history buffs, we can learn from this pivotal chapter in global history. It is a story not just of the past, but one that resonates today, reminding us of the need to reflect on the lessons of history to build a fairer and more just future. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.